Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter.
This is a little bit different this year, isn't it? The Easter service we're having. It's not the same. Things are different. We don't get to worship together and as one family together. We still get to worship, but not together. We don't know about the future, do we? We don't know about next week. We don't know about tomorrow with everything that's going on right now. It's a lot different. It's strange. But you know, when they celebrated Easter the very first time, the day that Jesus Christ was risen from the dead, it was different for those guys too, for the disciples, because they had been with Jesus for 3.5 years. They had lived with him, walked with him, laughed with him, cried with him. They had seen so many amazing things, and they thought that this was probably going to be the way it was going to be forever. But it wasn't. Now they were waking up to the reality that Jesus was dead, that they thought he was in that tomb and that he would never be out again. They would never see him again. Their whole world had come crumbling down. They didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring. They didn't know what next week would bring. They were much like us today as we celebrate Easter, in unsettling conditions and situations that we have facing us. We don't know what tomorrow brings. So today, Susie and I, we want to talk to you a little bit about the empty tomb, because the disciples, as you know, were mistaken, and they gloriously found out for themselves pretty quickly too that Jesus was alive. And so we're going to talk about that. The empty tomb means so much to everyone, for all of mankind that has ever lived. Because of the empty tomb, because Christ was risen, we have the opportunity to have hope, to have a future. All kinds of things that we would not have had if Christ had remained in that tomb. But we have those opportunities now. That's for all of mankind. But what about us on a personal level? And today, Susie and I want to talk to you about what does that empty tomb mean to us personally? What does it mean that Christ is alive and that tomb is empty? So we'll talk about a story. I'll tell you, most of you are familiar with this story, but if you want to read about it, you can read about it in John chapter 20. You can pick it up there and read through the whole story yourself. But on Easter morning and Sunday morning, Mary went to the tomb before daylight just to be with Jesus. And so she went, and when she got there, the stone was already rolled away, and the tomb was empty. So she turned and she ran back and got Peter and John and told them what had happened. And so they all three went back to the tomb. And Peter and John, they went inside and they looked around and they saw that Jesus was gone. And they didn't know what to do. So they just went back to where they were staying. But Mary didn't. Mary stayed. Mary was crying outside of the tomb. And she stayed there. And she bent down and she looked inside the tomb and she saw two angels sitting in there. And they said to her, "Woman, why are you crying?" And she said, "Because." She said, "Because they have taken my Lord and I don't know where they put him." And then she turned away from the tomb and looked outside, and Jesus was standing behind her, but she didn't know it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And she looked at him and she said, she thought he was the gardener. She didn't realize it was Jesus. And so she said to him, "They have taken my Lord. If you know where they put him, please tell me so I can take him away." And Jesus looks at her and he says one word, "Mary." And as soon as he spoke her name, she knew it was Jesus. Jesus says that his children, that his people will know his voice. And when he spoke Mary's name, she knew immediately who it was. And she tried to just hug him and cling to him. And Jesus said, "Don't cling to me yet. I have not yet ascended to my Father." He said, "Go and tell my brothers that I am ascending to my Father, your Father, to my God and your God." This story has so much about relationship and about it and what happened and what that empty tomb means to us. So Susie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you think? What jumps out at you in that story that really affects your heart?
I think for me personally, I was just reflecting on Mary and how Mary had gotten up very early in the morning and had gone to the tomb. Obviously, she was very heartbroken and confused and just completely wrecked, over what had just happened to Jesus. So she had gone to the tomb, and I just think, like her going there, it's just like what we would do if we had lost a loved one, how we would just be so wrecked and confused and hurt. And so that's kind of where she's at. She just goes to the tomb to just pray and just collect her thoughts and just wondering what has just happened. And then when Jesus appears to her, I just find it kind of neat that he just appears to her alone. He doesn't appear when everyone's there. He appears to her alone, and maybe because she was so hurt and broken, and they had such a close relationship, that he was just there trying to console her and give her hope. And I think that's what I see is like the tomb wasn't empty. We have so much hope, and Jesus just came, and he just in that moment, her whole world was turned upside down, that she saw he was alive, and that she had hope, and that, Christ was who he said he was, and that, she did not need to fear and mourn and cry. And he just gave her, turned that day upside down, and she was just filled with complete hope and joy, I'm sure.
How does that affect you in your personal life with Jesus?
Well, I think, for me personally, just knowing that my Savior's alive, and, I'm not worshiping a dead God. My God is alive. And, during times of unsettledness, just knowing that we have God here. God is with us always. He never leaves us. He never forsakes us. He's our comforter. He's our everything, and so to me that I just worship a risen God, and he's with me always.
One of my favorite parts about that scriptures too is when Jesus says, he says, go back and tell my brothers that I go to my Father and your Father. I go to my God and your God. Jesus is telling them, that we're a family, that I'm not alone. I'm not returning without you. That our relationship, this 3.5 years, is over. And that, all that was great and it was fun, but now it's gone. He was telling them that I'm going to my Father, your Father, my God and your God. A family, a relationship. And he couldn't have done that if he was still dead in the tomb. There's no way. And so it speaks of a relationship to me. It's this, that my God, that I have this God who loves me, my Lord who would die for me, and that my God, my Father who would raise him from the dead. That's what it speaks to me, to have the empty tomb. That everything is okay, everything is going as planned, and we have a future for us that's incredible because Jesus was risen. Paul said that if Jesus was not risen, then we're idiots, we're fools. Our faith is useless. But it's not, because Jesus was risen that day. You probably have heard the saying before that says, dead men tell no tales. Well, the reason they tell no tales is because dead men can't speak. But Jesus spoke to Mary. He spoke to her. Jesus is alive. And not only does he speak to Mary, but he speaks to us too. Throughout our whole life, we walk with him. That relationship, my God, my Father, my Lord and my Savior. He speaks to us. Dead men don't speak. Jesus is alive and well. And when he talks to us and he guides us through this life, even in times that we're going through right now that can be very trying for people, we know that God is with us. And because Jesus is alive, he speaks to us in so many different ways. Just like he did to Mary. And Mary recognized his voice. What did she do when Mary heard him call her by name? What do you do when Jesus calls you by name? In the relationship that you have with him and you walk with him, that he is alive to talk to you and to call you by name. What does that do for your relationship with him? The tomb is empty. Jesus is risen. The Apostle Paul said that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord and that you believe that God raised him from the dead, he said you will be saved. if you believe that God raised him from the dead. I believe Jesus is alive. And that's what Easter is about. The plan goes on. It did not end. The apostles and the disciples, they thought for a while there it had ended. But it did not. Jesus is alive. And we're a part of that plan. And we're a part of that family. My God, my Father. Guys, have a great Easter. I hope Jesus blesses you in every way. I hope he calls you by name. And I hope you have ears to hear when he calls you by name. That he would touch your heart. And that you would feel his life in you. You in him, and he in you. Be blessed. Have a great Easter.
Bye-bye.